Fierce vulnerability to me is about asking the biggest questions of what does it mean to honor the sanctity of life in this moment when there's so much destruction going on? What does it mean to commit ourselves to healing and wholeness in the midst of so much fracture? What does it mean to build a grounded and regulated nervous system while we're on the brink of a mass extinction event? What does it mean to continue to honor life in the midst of so much death and destruction? And this 3 month Kinvene Kinship Lab is a place to experiment with some of these questions in an embodied way. I spent the last 25 years kind of going back and forth between frontline movement work and spiritual and healing work, and I've felt that there's those two things have always been very fractured. And I think fierce vulnerability is about experimenting with, can we actually see frontline work as healing work and as spiritual work? And like desperately wanting to be in communities myself where we are doing deep healing work as the foundation through which we actually step out into the world and respond to some of the biggest crises that we are facing as a species. And the 300 plus people who are already registered for this program worldwide are going to be part of these small teams that are going to be doing these experiments that are going to give birth to something that none of us individually can imagine. And so just really excited to yeah, be in that experimental place with you all. The invitation is not only for you to deepen in relationship, but to actually figure out an embodied experiment in fierce vulnerability. What does fierce vulnerability look like in action? So the kind of what we will actually be doing is for the first half of the program, it'll be not a traditional book club, but we'll slowly collectively be going through different sections of the Fierce Vulnerability book. And throughout that time, we will be joined by guest speakers. So I mentioned Francis Weller, who is like such a source of wisdom around the importance of grief work. We'll be joined by Kyra Jewel Lingo, who I met when she was still Sister Jewel in the Plum Village tradition of Zen Buddhism, who will talk about the importance of spiritual practice in activist work. And we will also be joined by Ma Muse, who have written some of the songs that have become the soundtrack to so many of our movements. So we'll be talking about the importance of song culture. And those are all kind of themes throughout the book. So they'll help us kind of have a deeper sense of some of the content of the book. And then we're going to transition and we'll be led in future sessions and the later sessions by members of the Fierce Vulnerability Network. And so my friend Vicky will lead us in a practice that helps us remember how to listen to the voices of the natural world for guidance. And when we think about like what's a fierce vulnerability action that we can design, trying to get out of our heads and thinking about it, but listening to the trees and the forests and the rivers for guidance on what we might need to be doing. We will be joined by Oren J. Sofer, who is another meditation teacher who will be teaching us a lot more emotional regulation practices so that when we go out into the front lines or when we're having vulnerable conversations with our families, how do we stay grounded enough that we can remember that we belong to the person on the other side of the conflict? And we'll also be joined by my partner, Li Zen, who is the co-director of a school called the School of Unusual Life Learning, or SOUL. And they teach a philosophy on life that really incorporates the sanctity of death, not as the end of life, but as a sacred part of the cycle of life. And if we are able to accept death as a sacred part of life, then how might it shift our understanding of what it means to move through this time when so much death is happening, including the death of large systems? And all of that will support you all, hopefully, in designing your embodied fierce vulnerability experiment in your teams.